Welcome to Human Rights Education Now, a podcast series from Human Rights Educators USA. I'm your host, Bill Fernikes, a member of the National Steering Committee of HRE USA, a collaborative network to learn, teach, organize, advocate, and innovate for human rights education in the United States. This podcast aims to raise awareness about human rights education and invites listeners to engage with the worldwide movement to make human rights education a core focus of educational programs from preschool through higher education and in both non-formal and informal community educational settings. Today's program concludes our conversation with Jeff Plantilla, a leading Asian human rights education advocate and researcher at the Asia Pacific Human Rights Information Center in Osaka, Japan. Jeff discusses how his colleagues in other Asian countries are advancing human rights education, the importance of engaging communities from the ground up in human rights education by understanding their specific conditions of life and challenges, individuals who have inspired his work in human rights, a key quote which epitomizes how he approaches his human rights advocacy, and his strategic recommendation for advancing human rights education in diverse settings and communities. So, given the research you've done and the work you've done for 30 years, what are some of the principles or the suggestions or recommendations you might have for other human rights leaders around the world? You've done such wonderful work in Asia. How can they learn from you?
Yes, I have listed some things, but several points. If we really want to promote human rights, we have to recognize that there are different forms of human rights education. I myself started with legal education. I didn't even know much about women's or gender equality in a sense, or women's rights and so on. But I have to learn along the way. At the same time, I learned that there are many groups that are doing something that they are not labeling as human rights education, and yet related to human rights. So first is the recognition that there are many forms of human rights. We should not fall into the trap of saying human rights has one format, one way of doing things. The first thing that we have to understand is that there are different situations to talk about, and that therefore responses to that situation should be varied. It cannot be uniform. There are different political, social, economic conditions to meet, and therefore you have to react to whatever situations or conditions you are faced with. So therefore, your form of education can vary. It's not that you don't believe in human rights. It's just that you have to push within whatever restricted environment you have. If it's open, it's supportive, then you can all out be talking about human rights, no problem. Okay. The second point is there is a need to support such varied forms of human rights education. And this can be done by, first of all, you recognize them, but the other thing is that when you try to work with them, as I mentioned earlier, support can be in the form of getting them linked up with other groups doing similar things, or even doing different things. But some of them were looking for examples, how to do this, how to do that. Some of them have good materials. Why don't you share it with the others? So in this kind of support through exchange, through networking, to me is a very, very important thing, as far as my experience is concerned over the years, that they're very grateful that they have models to follow, they have materials to read, and then to adapt to their own system. And then the other point, the third point, is we need to emphasize local human rights education initiatives. Many of the things that are happening, especially in terms of different countries, are not happening only at the capital cities. There are initiatives outside of the big cities, in the small cities and some towns. And there are resources there that can be tapped For example, in several years, we have been trying to contact and put together a directory of human rights centers. Now, human rights centers can be of different forms. They can be university-based, just like the ones in Columbia University, I think. You can have an NGO-based center, or you can have centers sponsored by the governments. Possible. And they are existing in many different countries. In Indonesia, for example, they already put up a lot of the so-called pushams. These are university-based centers. And these universities are outside of Jakarta, the main city of Indonesia. In Korea, the same. The National Human Rights Commission of Korea have been working with the university-based human rights centers to help promote human rights even more to the students as well as to other places, other people outside of the university. In other countries, you have similar structures, maybe NGOs more than universities. So these different centers exist. They operate. They have resources, even though small, but they are resources. And the good thing about it is that these human rights centers are actually doing research on the issues in their respective local areas. So they know more of what's happening in the local areas than anybody else. And so what do you do with your research, with the information that you have, with the issues that you have gathered? Then the next step is how to make those issues resolved somehow. And education is one step forward. Then you begin to educate your students. Then you begin to work with local governments. Then you begin to work with any institution in the community or in the local area. Maybe it's a small NGO, or maybe it's just a group of people, group of farmers, group of fisherfolk, group of whatever. And then you work together and see what you can do regarding the issue. So this, to me, should be given more emphasis because much of the work that we do really happens at the local level. Much of the change also happens there. We cannot always expect things to happen at the national level. It's too big. But we can expect things to happen on the ground. And then much of the resistance to human rights also comes from the local culture, the local practices, the local traditions. You cannot face those problems or issues or whatever resources available that may be used against human rights unless you deal with them at that level. So what I'm saying, therefore, is that aside from knowing that there are a variety of human rights education forms, there are also resources and structures that you have to tap existing at the local areas. And this is what we have been doing also in Human Rights Osaka. Aside from purely human rights education program, we also have the Human Rights Centers program. And again, the idea is to give them recognition, importance, and to also find out that they're doing something great in their respective areas. I really like the local ones. Those are my favorites. The one who requested that lecture was not a human rights organization, but an NGO working with the fisher folk. Human rights education is not even their program. But they wanted the people that they're working with, the fisher folk, subsistence fisher folk, to understand human rights. Because that's essential for them to be able to assert whatever rights they have in relation to their status as fisher folk. That is just to show you that this thing can happen anytime, anywhere. That the ones talking to you is someone you don't recognize as a human rights organization. That's one. The second point that I would like to stress was many years ago, I had the head of an organization working with the so-called slum dwellers, or now they call them as informal settlers. Related the story that sometime before that, she was told that what she was doing was not human rights work. And she felt bad. She felt bad that the response, this comment was telling her that you're not with us. You're not part of us. So there is this idea that human rights work is this and not this. Now, we have to remember there was a time when human rights were only about civil and political rights. And there was a time that though they recognize economic, social, and cultural rights, there's a hierarchy. Civil and political rights first, economic, social, cultural rights next. There's this kind of discussion. This is the point that I'm saying, that if those people who were not recognized as human rights organizations are doing something great, I would love to work with them. And this group actually is working on housing rights. Now, you remember there is this housing rights conference in Turkey, 1890s also, which recognized precisely the right to housing as a human right. The other thing is that the beauty of this kind of human rights education work is that they bring in other people into the fold. In order to realize the housing right, you can get in the engineers, you can get in the architects, people who would normally not touch human rights. But then if you bring them in, then they will have to think, how are you going to help these slum dwellers realize their right to housing? By building houses that would be within their means in terms of resources, that would be something that is healthy for them, and so on and so forth. And that would, of course, be compliant with laws on building and structures and what. So this, to me, is a significant experience that I really appreciate, that you bring in science and technology into an issue that is dear to the people affected by housing problem. So that's the second example where I thought that really have to look for more of them, because they're doing great things and they have networks in different countries, and in Asia at least. And then there are other situations. And let me go to Japan. As I've said earlier, the government already said, yes, let's promote human rights. Okay, human rights education, fine. But in the implementation side, there are problems. For example, child rights. In many cases, people resist the word rights in relation to children, because the traditional notion of rights means power, capacity. So you don't want to associate that power with children, because they think children should not have that power. Not yet. They're children. So in some cases, there is this network, or child rights network in Japan, trying to convince the local government to adopt ordinances on child rights. The local government people say, of course, we should. But in the title of the ordinance, we cannot use rights. We can only use children. So child ordinances. This is not true of all local governments, but there are local governments who say, no, we cannot, because people will protest. Why are we using this thing? This is against our concept of children and our societal values and so on. So anyway, the point is that you have to adapt to that, and therefore it's okay. You have an ordinance on children, but within the ordinance, you have something related to child rights. The other point is that despite the fact that there are many initiatives, there are still people who thought human rights are too serious a matter for them to get involved in. Oh, no. Sorry. No. I have work to do. This is too much for me. We're just living simple life. We want to live peacefully and quietly. Therefore, I noticed when I first came to Japan that their flyers would have a kind of happy, joyful kind of children laughing and, everyone smiling. And so I said, this is a human rights activity, isn't it? Yes. Why is this drawing like this? It's like a children's, let's come and play type of a design. I said, if you put their human rights discussing this great issue, they will not come because they are afraid of the issue. You have to bring them in by telling them, let's discuss something, this and that, in a nice way. So there is this resistance that's still there. And therefore also, in some of the so-called human rights activities of local governments, you would have a festival, it says human festival. It's not human rights festival, it's human festival. Or you can have this Furiay festival, meaning a festival or a gathering where people exchange or meet each other and so on. So you have to package things in a way that would not immediately reveal the real purpose of it, which is to promote human rights, which is to raise awareness about human rights. You have to put it in a way that is joyful and fun. So which means underlying it is still the reservation that human rights are understood in a rather negative sense. And probably because also of the human rights movement, I would say. They've been very strong and assertive and, vocal that scared people in a sense. So you have to therefore relearn human rights in a way that says human rights are broad enough to be able to relate to each and every issue that we have in society and whatever concerns people have. You don't have to worry about this. Not everything is political. Not everything can be seen as serious. It can be as simple as your own case, your own job, for example. How is your condition in your workplace? Are you paid well? Are you treated equally? Are you harassed? Or so on and so forth. What about your children? Are they getting the right education? Or are they being deprived of education for some reason or the other? So, that's how we have to relate to people. These are people who have a certain idea of human rights that we have to, in a sense, clarify and bring them in first, and then we talk about human rights later on. So what I'm saying, therefore, is that many initiatives don't have the label human rights, but they do something about human rights. It can be quoted, it can be mixed with many things, but that's human rights nevertheless, or human rights education, or human rights promotion, or you can call it whatever you like. But the point is, we have to understand them, and if possible, support them if we can. But to me, as I go back to the 3 points that I made, recognize them. You may not have to promote them in such that this is human rights and reveal what they are. The thing is, you give them the kind of recognition that they deserve and the support that they can deserve. And then finally, of course, it is local, then, get them to really do something in their own local communities. So that's the reason.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So that's the reason why I was saying that even at the regional level, you have groups that are doing something about what the consumer rights and so on. They don't call human rights, they call consumer rights. Can even the environmental groups or any other rights working on specific sectors of society, women, children, and so on, would not call their organizations or their programs human rights programs. And yet they do something about it. Just like what I said, relating to the fisher folk. So I would like to get them in the sense, but also to hopefully support them if possible.
Well, I think that's great advice for so many people who work in the human rights field. Well, as we move towards the conclusion of our conversation, let me bring up a few questions we ask everybody on this podcast. So I'm going to start with this one. Who would be the most influential role model for your work in human rights education? That person can be alive today or may have passed along.
I've been thinking about that. And I have a difficult time thinking about. There are many great human rights educators, I know. But maybe my sense is that it's not one person. Instead, it's I would rather say a human rights educator who is good and who I would think would be really, really something that I can idolize. Has so many characteristics that cannot belong to a single person. But those characteristics would be something like someone who respects people that they interact, that he or she interact with. I've seen people who would like to educate others, but then who would look down on others also at the same time, who would order people around and who would not really practice what they preach. So I don't like it. I like people who respect people. And then humility, sharing knowledge and skill in a very, very humble way. It cannot be simply because I know and therefore you listen. And the other thing is that patience. You're an educator, it's not something that you can do in just, letting them sit down. Learning and change in thinking and attitude, that takes time. But to me, the best thing to do is to really understand them and you understand them, even it's not as easy as in my experience as one would like. But then you have to do it, in a sense, patiently. As you go along, maybe you can learn more. about them and about yourself also. How are you really getting to get them into the understanding of human rights and so on? And then, of course, the determination that what you're doing should lead to something. You're not forcing them. You're not ordering them. But whatever you do has some results. It may not come easily. Not tomorrow, not next year. But at least you have a sense that something will happen towards the end of the effort that you're making. So that determination has to be there because you want at least something changed and something done, or hopefully will be done, that they decide to do.
So, what would be a quote that you feel inspires your work or that's emblematic of your work?
Right. This is also written in that article about this, the book you wrote, the quote. I would have to say this in my language, in Tagalog, and I will translate it in English. I really love this, by the way. I'll have to say it now. Hindi natin dapat iasa sa mga taong busog ang paglutas ng problema nating mga gutom. This may not be the exact words, but this is a quote. Now, this translates to this. We should not entrust to people with full stomach the resolution of problems of us who are hungry. When I first read this, it was in a calendar, an NGO. They had this calendar and they have quotes in each month. I was surprised that this was a quote from a farmer or a farmer leader in one province outside the capital city. And then when I met him finally, I said, I love the quote that you made. Because this is a very good message for human rights educators. At the end of the day, the people have to decide. The people have to move based on their decision. We don't push them. Otherwise, that's not empowering. And if we cannot get them to realize that that should not depend on us, who are not suffering from their problem, I think we need to go back and start all over again. I mean, just like Paulo Freire's experience in the 60s, when he was asked by workers, tell us what to do. That was exactly my experience without knowing Paulo Freire. Whenever I go to communities and groups and then, oh, you're a lawyer. Please tell us what to do. But I insist, no. I'm here to facilitate discussion. I'm here to allow you to think. But you decide. So there is this resistance, but towards the end, we begin to realize that, yes, they can do the analysis. Yes, they can find solutions. So that is the kind of saying or quote that I go back to every now and then. And I have to stop myself in a sense. Hey, what are you doing? Are you simply imposing? Or are you facilitating learning? So therefore, I use this as a favorite quote.
And so, for our last question, if you had to frame one strategic recommendation for advancing human rights education in Asia, or even in your own home country, in the Philippines or Japan, what would be that strategic focus?
That's a difficult question. Strategic focus. May not be a strategic focus, but more of an approach. In the sense that we have to target concrete issues. People would listen to you if you tell something that relates to their concrete, everyday life. It's good to talk about the UN documents. It's talk about all these universal principles. But unless you're able to link up with their own issues, even their own way of thinking, things may not be as effective as we would like it to be. Therefore, if I were to have that kind of approach, I would first say that let's study carefully the people and the society where the people are. And from there, you may say from ground up, develop something with them. In that sense, to me, things will become a little more likely to succeed. I don't even assume that that will succeed, but at least that is to me, the starting point is being with them at that level, in the sense that you understand each other and you understand why they think in that way, why they see the problem that way, and why they will even see the solution in a certain way, which you may find contradictory to human rights. But that is precisely the challenge of a human rights educator. Otherwise, if there's no such thing, there's no problem with education. Things will go smoothly, but that doesn't follow. So go to that level of, I would say, if I put the UN below and the community above, I'll go up to that level of the people. Understand them and develop something with them.
Well, Jeff, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and your insights, I think, of working with so many different cultures have been extremely valuable. And we look forward to having this conversation continue in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill, also for this opportunity to be part of your podcast, HRE USA.
Thanks for listening to Human Rights Education Now. You can find additional information about this podcast series at www.hreusa.org. Each episode is available on the HRE USA podcast page, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Pocket Casts, Player FM, and Deezer. You can also download each episode as an MP3 file. If you have questions or comments about this podcast, send them to Christy at hreusa.org. That's KRISTI at hreusa.org. Our podcast team includes producer and editor Bill Fernikes, executive producer Christy Redelius-Palmer, editor Elizabeth Schwab, sound designer and project manager Sabrina Sanchez, communications and public outreach coordinator Tia Hins, and production coordinator Jasmine Chizu Gota. Human Rights Education Now is a production of Human Rights Educators USA, a project of the Center for Transformative Action in Ithaca, New York.